Retirement for my husband Bill and me was not an ending. It was a logistical masterpiece, the culmination of 40 years of meticulous planning. We had traded our sprawling suburban house in New Jersey for a sleek, modern condo in Jersey City. A glass and steel box in the sky with $1 million view of the Manhattan skyline. We had downsized our lives, but upgraded our living. Our days were a symphony of beautiful, predictable order. Mornings were for the rooftop garden I cultivated, a riot of tomatoes and herbs wrested from the urban landscape. Afternoons were for long walks along the Hudson, watching the ferries glide across the water. Evenings were for the quiet, comfortable companionship of two people who had successfully navigated for decades of marriage and careers and had arrived content on the peaceful shores of their golden years. I had spent my entire professional life as a logistics director for one of the world's largest shipping companies. My job had been to impose order on a world of chaos. I had rerouted container ships around typhoons, navigated the labyrinthine customs regulations of 100 different countries, and once, famously, had located a single lost shipping container filled with critical medical supplies in the middle of the port of Rotterdam using nothing but a flawed bill of lading and a satellite phone. I was a woman who believed in systems. I believed in rules. I believed that for the world to function, everyone simply had to put their things in the right place, which is why our parking spot was so important in the concrete bowels of our condo building. The parking garage was a kingdom unto itself, a brutalist landscape where status was measured in square feet. And our spot, number 1A, was the crown jewel. It was deeded, not rented. It was oversized. It was a mere 20 feet from the elevator lobby. It was covered, protecting our sensible Subaru from the rain and snow. We had paid a staggering premium for it when we bought the condo, an amount that could have purchased a small house in many other parts of the country. It was not just a place to put our car. It was the ultimate symbol of a life well planned, a final, perfect piece of personal logistics. The chaos arrived in a cloud of cologne and entitlement on the 1st of May. The penthouse condo at the end of our hall, which had been empty for months, was sold. The new owner was a young man named Braden. His move-in was an event of breathtaking arrogance. His movers blocked the service elevator for 6 hours. His oversized modern furniture scraped the walls of the hallway. And the air was filled with the sound of his shouting into his phone about some stock trade or another. He was, as my husband Bill so elegantly put it after a brief, unpleasant encounter in the hallway, a first-class prick. The first infraction occurred 2 days later. We came home from a grocery run to find a car in our spot. It was not just any car. It was a Porsche 911. Painted a shade of electric blue, so loud and obnoxious it seemed to vibrate under the fluorescent lights of the garage. It was parked at a slight angle, its front tire a good 6 inches over the white line. Small but significant act of spatial dominance. There was no temporary guest pass on the dashboard. It was a pure, unadulterated act of entitlement. "Well, look at that," Bill said, his voice a low rumble of annoyance. The new neighbor seems to be confused about the definition of deeded. Property, I, however, was not yet annoyed. I was a systems analyst. This was simply a data input error, a failure of communication. It required a clear, polite, and well-documented corrective action. That evening, I typed up a note, "Welcome to the Palisades condominiums." It began the font of friendly but professional Times New Roman. Just a friendly reminder that parking in this garage is assigned. This spot, number 1A, is a privately owned deeded space As per the Condo Association bylaws, see Section C, Paragraph 4, unauthorized parking in a deeded spot is strictly prohibited. Thank you for your cooperation. I laminated the note laminating. Adds a certain undeniable gravitas and tucked it neatly under the Porsche's windshield wiper. Problem stated. Solution offered. System engaged. I went to bed confident that the error had been corrected. The next afternoon, when we returned from a walk, the Porsche was still there. My beautiful laminated note was lying on the concrete floor, a single muddy footprint marring its surface. The data input error had not been an error. It had been an intentional act of defiance. My annoyance was now beginning a slow, steady climb toward anger. This was no longer a logistical problem. This was a direct challenge. I decided to try direct. Communication. I took the elevator up to the penthouse and knocked on his door. He answered it shirtless, a towel slung around his neck, the scent of his cologne wafting into the hallway. He was handsome, in the bland, overconfident way of a man who has never been told he is wrong. Yeah. He said, not a question, but a challenge. Hello, I said, my voice polite but firm. I'm Carolyn Reed, your neighbor from 12A. I believe you're parked in my spot. He looked at me, a slow, dismissive smirk spreading across his face. He was looking at my gray hair, my comfortable cardigan, my sensible shoes. And he was seeing not a person, but an obstacle. Ah, a harmless, dotty old lady. Oh yeah, the blue one, he said with a laugh. Relax, sweetheart. It's just a car. I had a late night. It was the closest spot. I'll move it when I move it. Is my spot, I repeated, my voice losing its polite edge. I pay a mortgage on it. I pay taxes on it. You cannot park there. Listen, lady, he said, his tone now one of open condescension. It's a beautiful car, right? You should be happy to have it gracing your little piece of concrete. Just chill out. It's not a big deal. He closed the door in my face. I stood there in the silent carpeted hallway, my blood beginning to boil. Sweetheart lady, chill out. It was the holy trinity of dismissive, misogynistic bullshit. He had not just ignored the rule, he had dismissed my right to enforce it. My final attempt was to engage the system. I filed a formal written complaint. With our condo association board, I cited the bylaws. I attached a photo of his car in my spot. I requested official action be taken. The response I received a week later, after 2 more days of my spot being occupied, was a masterpiece of spineless, bureaucratic incompetence. The board president, a corporate lawyer who was terrified of any form of direct confrontation, sent a building-wide email reminding residents to be mindful and courteous of parking assignments. There was no mention of Braden, no specific violation, no threat of a fine or towing. It was the equivalent of posting a sign that said, please, if it's not too much trouble, consider not breaking the rules. It was useless, and Braden knew. He saw the email as a victory, a confirmation that the system was as weak and as toothless as he had assumed. The pattern was now set. My spot was no longer my spot. It was his unofficial second spot, his overflow parking, his personal convenience, store for his 6-figure sports car. He would park there 2 or 3 times a week whenever it suited him, with a kind of brazen, unapologetic entitlement that I found both fascinating and infuriating. Over the next month, I got a fuller picture of our new neighbor. He was a creature of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He held loud, bass-heavy parties that went until 3 in the morning. He left his overflowing trash bags in the hallway next to the garbage chute instead of putting them down it. He was rude and dismissive to the building's elderly doorman, a lovely man named Stan who had worked here for 20 years. Braden was not just a bad neighbor. He was a black hole of common courtesy. But it was the parking spot that remained the central symbolic battlefield. It was a daily, concrete reminder of his disrespect. It was a violation of the order I had built my entire life around. Every time I saw his stupid electric blue car in my space, it was a small declaration of war. It was him saying, "I am more important than you. My convenience is more important than your rules." I continued to document every infraction. I took pictures. I sent polite, ignored emails to the condo board. I was following the established procedure, the logical, civilized system for dispute resolution. But the system was failing. And in the back of my mind, in the quiet, methodical corners where I used to solve complex logistical puzzles, a new, far more creative set of variables was beginning to take shape. I started to see his car not as a car, but as a piece of cargo, a consignment, a 4,000-pound package that had been incorrectly routed and was now illegally occupying my warehouse space. And my mind, a mind trained for 40 years to solve exactly this kind of problem, began to churn. I had spent my life finding creative ways to move valuable assets from a place they were not supposed to be, to a place they were supposed to be. The old Caroline Reed, the polite, rule-following retiree, was growing tired. And Carolyn Reed, the retired logistics director, the woman who had once diverted a fleet of cargo planes around a volcanic ash cloud, was beginning to get an idea. A beautiful, terrible, and exquisitely complicated idea. The breaking point was still to come, but the seed of the operation. The blueprint for the most complex and satisfying shipment of my entire career had just been planted. For a month, we lived in a state of Cold War. The electric blue Porsche would appear in my parking spot, number 1A, with an infuriating randomness. Sometimes it would be there for an hour. Sometimes it would sit there for 2 straight days. Braden, my entitled penthouse neighbor, treated my deeded property as his own personal valet service. A convenient place to leave his chariot when the guest spots were full, or when he simply couldn't be bothered to walk an extra 50 feet. Each appearance was a fresh, silent declaration of his contempt. I followed the proper channels with the grim, methodical patience of a seasoned bureaucrat. I sent 3 more formal, dated complaints to the condo board via certified mail. I recorded every single infraction in a small black notebook with the date, time, and a photograph. I was building a case, a perfect, unassailable mountain of evidence. But the board, a feckless committee of my well-meaning but conflict-averse neighbors, was useless. They held a special meeting. They passed a new resolution. They sent out another strongly worded building-wide email about community parking etiquette. It was the equivalent of trying to stop a tank with a strongly worded petition. Braden, of course, was emboldened by their weakness. He saw their toothless emails not as a warning, but as a victory. He began to treat me with a new level of smug, dismissive amusement. He'd see me in the elevator and say things like, "Hey, Caroline, keeping my spot warm for me." He saw me as the harmless, dotty old lady, the neighborhood crank, a powerless figure of fun. The deep, slow-burning anger in my chest was beginning to coalesce into something harder, something more dangerous. I had spent 40 years of my life solving impossible logistical problems, and I was beginning to realize that Braden was no longer just an annoyance. He was a logistical problem. And he had no idea who he was messing with. The final irrevocable breaking point came on a miserable, storm-swept night in early June. Bill and I had spent the day in Princeton, visiting my old college roommate who was recovering from a nasty bout of pneumonia. It had been a long, emotionally draining day, and we were driving home in a torrential biblical downpour. The kind of storm where the windshield wipers can't keep up and the highway turns into a sheet of black. Reflective glass. We had stopped on the way home to pick up a week's worth of groceries. Not just for us, but a few special, comforting things for our sick friend, as well as a container of her favorite soup from a gourmet deli. A specific type of English tea. The back of our Subaru was loaded. We finally pulled into the sanctuary of our building's garage around 9 o'clock at night. The sound of the rain hammering on the concrete roof, a welcome respite from the chaos of the highway. We were tired. We were stressed, and all I wanted was to get upstairs, put my feet up, and have a glass of wine. I turned the corner towards our spot, and there it was, the electric blue Porsche, sitting smugly in number 1A, bone dry, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. My spot. The one single covered and convenient spot I had paid a king's ransom for was occupied by the chariot of the golden child. You have got to be kidding me. Bill snarled, his voice a low growl of pure fury. Every other residence spot was, of course, occupied. The guest parking was full. My only option was the unsecured open-air overflow lot 3 blocks away. In the middle of a monsoon. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, a wave of pure, white-hot rage washing over me. But rage doesn't get the groceries unpacked. I took a deep, steadying breath. "Okay," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Let's just get this over with." The next 20 minutes were a symphony of misery. We found a spot in the overflow lot at the far end of the block, under a flickering street lamp that was about to give up the ghost. The moment we opened the car doors, the storm seemed to redouble its efforts, the rain coming down in cold horizontal sheets, instantly soaking us to the bone. The journey from the car to our building lobby was a brutal, multi-stage operation. The first bag, the one with the eggs and the bread, slipped from my wet fingers, its contents smashing and scattering across the slick, grimy pavement. The second trip, Bill's bag, which contained the glass jar of expensive gourmet soup for my friend, ripped at the bottom, the jar exploding on the sidewalk with a sickening crash. We trudged back and forth, our arms aching, our clothes plastered to our skin, the wind whipping the rain into our faces, all while Braden's 6-figure sports car sat warm, dry, and protected in the spot I had paid for. It was on my final dripping and utterly defeated trip into the lobby that I looked up. Our building had staggered balconies, and his penthouse was on the far side, but you could see it from the front entrance. And there he was, Braden. He was standing on his covered balcony, a glass of what looked like whiskey in his hand, a silhouette against the warm, inviting light of his apartment. He was watching us. He was watching me, a 68-year-old woman, struggling with a broken grocery bag in the middle of a hurricane. And he was smirking. It was not a friendly smirk. It was not a smirk of indifference. It was a smirk of pure, unadulterated amusement. He was enjoying this. My struggle, my misery, was a form of entertainment for him. It was a confirmation of his own power, his own superiority in that single, terrible moment. Something inside me, a core component that had been stressed and strained for weeks, finally, cleanly, and irrevocably snapped. The war was no longer cold. It was hot. And I was done following the rules of engagement. Back in our apartment, after we had peeled off our soaking clothes and thrown the ruined groceries in the trash, Bill paced the living room like a caged lion. He was ranting, his anger a hot, unfocused, and ultimately useless thing. "That's it, Caroline," he fumed. "I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow. We'll sue him. We'll sue the condo board. I'll slash his tires." "I'll know, Bill," I said. My voice was quiet. He stopped his pacing and looked at me. I was not angry anymore. The rage had burned away, leaving behind a feeling of profound, exhilarating, and terrifying clarity. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, a glass of whiskey, a much better brand than Braden's. I was sure in my hand. "A lawsuit is messy and expensive," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip. "Slashing his tires is a crime. And the condo board is a collection of well-meaning invertebrates. The system has failed. Conventional warfare is not an option. So what do we do?" he asked, his own anger deflating in the face of my strange, cold calm. "We just let him win." "Oh no," I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. It was a smile he hadn't seen since my working days, the smile I got when I was about to solve an unsolvable problem. "We are not going to let him win. We are going to escalate. Okay. We are going to engage in asymmetrical warfare." I stood up and walked to my study. I felt a familiar, powerful, and deeply satisfying sensation take hold of me. It was the thrill of the hunt. The intellectual joy of designing a perfect, complex, and airtight operation. Braden was no longer just an entitled neighbor. He was a logistical challenge of the highest order. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Problem analysis, a high value. Non-essential asset, 1 Porsche 911. Electric blue is being illegally stored in a premium designated slot number 1A in my secure facility. The asset's owner is hostile and unresponsive to standard protocols. The governing body, the condo board, is unwilling or unable to enforce its own regulations. Objective: to remove the asset from my facility and transport it to a long-term, highly inconvenient, and expensive to-retrieve storage location using a methodology that is legally ambiguous, financially untraceable to me, and psychologically devastating to the asset's owner. Proposed solution: method of removal, not a standard tow. A local tow is easily traced and legally defined. The asset must be moved by a professional, long-haul, white-glove vehicle transport service. This reframes the event from a local infraction to an interstate commerce issue. It looks less like a theft and more like a legitimate, if mysterious, shipment. Destination: not a public impound lot. It must be a private, secure location. A place that creates a bureaucratic and legal nightmare for the owner to retrieve his property from. Somewhere out of state, somewhere inconvenient. Somewhere like Delaware, a state known for its labyrinthine corporate laws and frustrating bureaucracy. I had a cousin with a farm and a large, empty, and very secure barn in a remote part of Delaware. A perfect, untraceable private storage facility. Execution: create a plausible pretext. Forge the necessary documentation. Schedule A. Middle of the night pickup to avoid witnesses. And then sit back and watch the chaos unfold. I began my research. I opened a new encrypted browser window. My first search was for discrete, enclosed, long-haul vehicle transport. My second was for how to forge a bill of lading. My third was for the Delaware Civil Code regarding privately stored property. The old Carolyn Reed, the polite retiree, was gone. She had been washed away in the storm. In her place was Caroline Reed, the retired director of global logistics. The woman who had once diverted a fleet of cargo planes around a volcanic ash cloud with nothing but a phone and a map, and she was about to plan the single most satisfying shipment of her entire career. The operation had begun. The moment Braden smirked at me from his balcony, the moment he took pleasure in my rain-soaked misery, the Cold War ended. The file in my mind for Braden parking infraction was closed. A new one was opened. Operation Porsche Relocation. The objective was clear. The strategy, however, required the kind of meticulous, multi-layered planning that had once been the hallmark of my career. For the first time in my retirement, I felt that old, familiar, and deeply satisfying thrill, the intellectual joy of a complex logistical puzzle. My first step, taken at 2 a.m. while Bill snored softly beside me, was reconnaissance. I slipped out of bed, dressed in dark clothing, and took the service elevator down to the garage. The space was silent, humming with the low electric thrum of a sleeping building. I moved with a quiet purpose, a ghost in the concrete labyrinth. My only companion, the small, powerful beam of a penlight. I approached the electric blue Porsche, my enemy's sleeping chariot. It was a beautiful machine, I had to admit, but its beauty was tainted by the arrogance of its owner. Through the driver's side window, just at the base of the windshield, was the VIN plate. I took out my phone, my hand steady, and took a series of high-resolution, flash-free photographs. I did the same for the license plate, front and back, and for the small, almost unnoticeable resident parking sticker on the bumper, which I knew would have his unit number on it. I was in and out in less than 5 minutes. The intelligence gathering phase was complete. The next few days were a deep dive into research. I sat in my study, surrounded by my beloved books on history and art, but my laptop screen was a portal into a different world, the complex, unregulated, and fascinating world of private vehicle transport. I was not looking for a local tow company. A tow is a public act, a recordable event. It is a temporary solution for a permanent problem. No, I needed something more elegant, more permanent. I needed to orchestrate a shipment. I created a spreadsheet, a beautiful, color-coded thing of military precision. In it, I listed every independent, long-haul, enclosed carrier transport company that operated in the tri-state area. I spent hours vetting them, reading reviews, analyzing their terms of service, and looking for the one with the perfect combination of professionalism and procedural loopholes. I found my target, a smaller, family-owned outfit based out of Allentown, Pennsylvania, called Keystone Auto Movers. They had glowing reviews for their careful handling of classic cars, and their booking process, I noted with a thrill, was primarily based on email and phone confirmations, not a rigid corporate online portal. They were perfect. Simultaneously, I conducted a legal deep dive. I spent hours on LexisNexis, a legal database I still had access to through the university library, reading the precise statutes for New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware regarding abandoned property, civil conversion, and the liabilities of private transport carriers. I learned that what I was planning was not technically theft. Theft requires the intent to permanently deprive the owner of their property. My intent was simply to move it to a secure location. It was a beautiful, legally ambiguous gray area, a place where a good lawyer could argue for years. The goal was not to commit an unprovable crime, but to create an irrefutable logistical nightmare. The final piece of the research puzzle was the destination. I called my cousin Sal in Delaware. Sal was a 70-year-old retired mechanic who had spent his life with grease under his fingernails and a healthy distrust for authority in his heart. "Hey, Sal, it's Caroline," I said when he answered. "Carrie, how the hell are you?" he boomed. "Don't tell me your Subaru is acting up again." "The Subaru is fine," I laughed. "I have a strange and possibly illegal favor to ask you." "Those are my favorite kind," he said, his voice full of mischief. I explained the situation, the entitled neighbor, the stolen parking spot, the useless condo board. And then I laid out my plan: transport, the forged paperwork, and the need for a secure, private, and uncooperative final destination for a very expensive Porsche. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Sal let out a roar of pure, unadulterated laughter that was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "That's my girl," he crowed. "I always said you were the smart one in the family. You need a place to stash a fancy car for a while. A back barn has been empty for years. Consider it done. It'll be the most exciting thing to happen in this town since a cow got loose on the highway in '98. The destination was secured. The facility manager was on board. Now came the most critical phase: creating the legend. I went to a local electronics store and purchased a cheap, prepaid burner phone. Then, I went to the public library and used their computers to create a new, untraceable email address. Brenda. BradENS.assistant@gmail.com. I was no longer Carolyn Reed, retired grandmother. I was Brenda, the harried, efficient, and slightly overwhelmed personal assistant to the very important, very busy Mr. Braden. I spent an afternoon crafting my performance. Then I made the call. "Keystone Auto Movers. This is Patty speaking," a friendly voice answered. "Hello, Patty," I said, my voice an octave higher, my tone a perfect imitation of a stressed but professional assistant. "My name is Brenda, and I am the personal assistant for Mr. Braden in Jersey City. I have a last-minute high-priority transport request, and your company comes highly recommended." I spun the tale I had so carefully crafted. "Mr. Braden is a collector of classic cars," I explained. "And he has just been accepted as a last-minute entry into a very exclusive show, the Wilmington Concours d'Elegance. It's a surprise for his father, who is a major collector and lives nearby in Delaware." It's all very sentimental and very, very rushed. Patty was completely sympathetic. "Oh, that's so sweet. A surprise for his dad. We can definitely help you with that. I'll just need some information on the vehicle and a signed transport authorization form." This was the moment of truth. "Of course," I said breezily. "I have all of Mr. Braden's details right here." Using a graphic design program I had learned from my gardening blog, I had created a masterpiece of amateurish but believable corporate letterhead: Braden Holdings, LLC. On this letterhead, I had drafted a simple transport authorization form. Using the photos of the VIN and license plate, I filled in all the necessary details. For the signature, I found an old copy of our condo board's newsletter, which had a picture of Braden winning the building's Best Balcony Garden Award, a competition he had undoubtedly cheated at. His signature was on the photo caption. I carefully scanned it, cleaned it up, and digitally inserted it onto the form. It was a perfect forgery. I emailed the completed form to Patty from my Brenda account. The final piece of the puzzle was payment. I purchased a dozen prepaid Visa gift cards from a grocery store using cash. Then, late that night, I used those cards to pay the $2,000 transport fee online. routing my connection through. A series of anonymous VPNs. The payment was untraceable. The paperwork was in order. The legend was complete. Patty called me back the next morning on my burner phone. "Right, Brenda, we are all set," she said cheerfully. "The contract is paid. Okay, we have a truck that can be there between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Our driver will call you when he is 30 minutes out." "Excellent," I said. "Mr. Braden is very grateful for your discretion and professionalism." The trap was now set. All I had to do was wait for the mouse to wander onto the trigger. For the next few days, I was a nervous wreck. What if he didn't park in my spot on Monday night? The entire elaborate and very expensive operation would be for nothing. On Monday evening, I watched from my balcony as Braden's Porsche pulled into the garage. He drove past his own empty spot. He drove past the empty guest spots, and then with a final beautiful act of pure, unthinking arrogance, he swung the electric blue car perfectly into my spot, number 1A. I let out a shuddering breath of pure, triumphant relief. I waited an hour until the lights in his penthouse apartment had gone out, and I made the final call on my burner phone. "Hi, Patty, Brenda here," I said. "Just confirming for the driver. The package is ready for pickup at the designated location at 2:45 a.m. on a quiet, moonless Tuesday morning." Bill and I stood in our darkened living room, looking out the massive window that overlooked the entrance to the parking garage. And then we saw it. A massive, unmarked, and utterly professional-looking 18-wheeler truck, the kind used to transport priceless race cars, pulled up to the gate. I had greased the wheels, literally. I had told Stan, our lovely night shift doorman, that a special delivery for a sick resident was arriving, and that I had already cleared it with the useless board. He opened the garage gate without a second thought. We watched as the huge truck navigated the tight corners of the garage and backed up to the aisle where my spot was. Two men in professional uniforms got out. They were not thugs. They were not repo men. They were silent, efficient artists. They consulted their paperwork under the beam of a flashlight. They laid down a ramp, and with a quiet electric whir, they winched the electric blue Porsche out of my life and into the dark, cavernous belly of the enclosed trailer. They strapped. It down-raised the ramp and sealed the massive rear door, the locking mechanism closing with a soft, definitive hydraulic hiss. It was a flawless white glove extraction. The truck pulled slowly out of the garage, its taillights two small red eyes disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness of the Jersey City streets. I stood there, watching it go, a feeling of profound, almost religious satisfaction washing over me. Bill came and stood behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You know, Carrie," he whispered in my ear, his voice full of a deep and abiding awe, "I have never loved you more than I do in this moment." I just smiled. The package was in transit. The problem had been solved. And my parking spot, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, was beautifully, gloriously, and permanently empty. The morning after the extraction was, for the first time in months, a morning of perfect, unadulterated peace. I woke to the gentle rays of the sun filtering through our bedroom window, the distant sound of a ferry horn on the Hudson, a soft, melancholic greeting. There was no knot of anxiety in my stomach. There was no simmering resentment. There was only the calm, clean, and deeply satisfying knowledge that my parking spot, #1A, was empty, Bill and I took our morning coffee out onto the balcony. It was a beautiful, clear day, the Manhattan skyline a glittering wall of glass and steel across the river. Our balcony overlooked the front entrance of the building and a portion of the garage ramp. We were in the front row for the performance that was about to begin. Showtime should be around 8:30, I'd imagine. Bill said, a mischievous twinkle in his eye as he took a sip of his coffee. Our Mr. Braden does like to get an early start on his important day of shouting at numbers on a screen. Patience, my dear, I said, arranging the cushions on my lounge chair. A good logistical outcome is like a good stew. You can't rush it. You have to let it simmer. We didn't have to wait long. At precisely 8:22 a.m., Braden strode out of the elevator lobby and into the garage. He was the picture of a Wall Street warrior, a perfectly tailored, ridiculously expensive suit, hair slicked back with a product that probably cost more than our weekly grocery bill. A phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders at some underling. He walked with the confident, purposeful stride of a man who owned the world. He was not looking where he was going. He was simply walking towards the spot where his chariot was always waiting. And then he stopped. The scene that unfolded below us was a beautiful slow-motion ballet of narcissistic implosion. First came the confusion. He stopped dead in his tracks, his phone call forgotten. He looked at the empty, pristine concrete of my parking spot. He looked up at the large stenciled 1A on the pillar beside it. He looked back at the empty space. His brain, a machine that ran on pure, unshakable entitlement, could not process the data. The car was supposed to be there. Therefore, it must be there. He clicked his car key, the little electronic chirp echoing in the quiet garage. Nothing happened. He clicked it again and again. He started to pace, walking up and down the aisle, peering into other parking spots. As if he might have simply misplaced his six-figure sports car like a set of reading glasses. Then the confusion began to curdle into panic. He started frantically patting his pockets, then searching his briefcase. He was operating under the assumption that the failure was his own, that he had left the car somewhere else, that his memory was faulty. The idea that someone else, some external force, could have possibly disrupted his universe had not yet occurred to him. Finally, after 5 full minutes of this frantic, fruitless searching, the final, terrible stage of his realization began to dawn. He stood once more in front of the empty spot, his face a mask of dawning horror. And then the panic erupted into pure, glorious, incandescent rage. What the fuck? His voice, a raw, primal scream of fury, echoed up to our balcony. He kicked the concrete pillar next to the spot, a move he instantly regretted as he hopped around, clutching his expensive Italian leather-clad foot. He pulled his phone back out, his thumb jabbing at the screen. We could hear his loud, indignant voice, even from 12 stories up. Double quotes, yes, I want to report a stolen vehicle. A Porsche, a 911. Yes, it's expensive. From my own goddamn garage. Get someone down here, now. Bill and I looked at each other, our expressions a perfect, shared mask of quiet, satisfied amusement. The stew was beginning to simmer nicely. 2 of Jersey City's finest arrived about 20 minutes later. We watched from our balcony as the 2 weary, sea-knee-tall police officers made their way down into the garage to meet with a still apoplectic Braden. He was gesturing wildly, pointing at the empty spot, his voice a high-pitched whine of indignation. The investigation, as we observed it from our bird's-eye view, was a masterpiece of anticlimax. The officers looked at the spot. They looked for broken glass. There was none. They looked for signs of forced entry on the garage gate. There were none. They looked at Braden, a spoiled rich kid throwing a tantrum, and their expressions were a perfect, beautiful blend of boredom and barely concealed contempt. Eventually, their procedural duties required them to interview the residents of our floor. We heard the knock on our door around 10 o'clock. I had changed into a soft lavender-colored sweatsuit and had put on a pair of my largest, most owlish reading glasses. I looked the very picture of a harmless, slightly dotty retiree. "Good morning, officers," I said, opening the door, my voice a gentle, concerned quaver. "Is everything all right? I heard some shouting earlier." "Morning, ma'am," the older of the two officers said, his eyes kind. "We're investigating a report of a stolen vehicle." "From your neighbor in the penthouse, Mr. Braden." I brought a hand to my chest in a gesture of pure theatrical shock. "Oh, my heavens!" "Stolen?" "His beautiful blue car." "Oh, that's just terrible! Right from our own secure garage." "Is anyone safe anymore?" "We're just asking if you saw or heard anything unusual last night, ma'am," the younger officer said, his pen poised over his notepad. "Unusual?" I said, furrowing my brow in deep feigned concentration. "No, not at all. It was a very quiet night. I believe a special medical supply truck was making a late-night delivery for one of the residents on the lower floors. But our doorman, Stan, had it all under control. It was all very professional and quiet. They were gone by 3:30. The officers exchanged a look. "A delivery truck." "Yes," I said. "Stan mentioned it to me yesterday. Something about a patient needing a special piece of equipment. I believe the board had approved it. But that was the only thing out of the ordinary. And as I said, it was very quiet. I had, of course, primed Stan the doorman with this exact, plausible story along with a very generous tip for his troubles. He was a good man who had no love for Braden. The officers thanked me for my time. I offered them a cup of tea, which they politely declined. As they were leaving, I leaned out my door, my face a mask of grandmotherly concern. "Please do let us know if you find that poor young man's car," I said. "He must be just devastated." I closed the door and leaned against it, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across my face. The performance was flawless. I was not a suspect. I was a concerned, slightly befuddled, and utterly harmless old lady. The next few days were a joy to behold. Braden's life descended into a special kind of bureaucratic hell. He was a man obsessed, a walking storm of frantic energy and impotent rage. We would see him in the hallways, his hair a mess, his eyes wild and bloodshot, always shouting into his phone. He yelled at the police for their incompetence. He yelled at the condo board for their lax security. And, most beautifully, he yelled at his insurance company, who, in the absence of any evidence of a theft, were treating his claim with extreme suspicion. He was a man who was used to getting his way, to having the world bend to his will. And he had just run headlong into a problem that he couldn't bully, bribe, or intimidate into submission. His car had not just been stolen, it had vanished. It had ceased to exist in his world. There was no trace of it, no record of it. No one to blame. On the third day, I saw him down in the garage, personally interrogating Stan the doorman, his face inches from the old man's, his voice a low, threatening growl. Stan, bless his heart, just looked back at him with a placid, uncomprehending stare. "I'm sorry, Mr. Braden," he said, his voice calm. "All I know is there was an approved late-night delivery. They had all the right paperwork." Braden finally gave up. letting out a scream of pure animal frustration. That echoed through the concrete cavern of the garage. He was a king with no kingdom, a man at war with a ghost. That evening, Bill and I sat on our balcony, sipping a particularly fine Bordeaux, watching the lights of the city begin to twinkle on. The air was cool and peaceful. Below us, in the garage, my parking spot, number 1A, was beautifully, gloriously, and immaculately empty. You know, Bill said, a look of deep admiration in his eyes. This is the most peaceful it's been around here in months. I agree, I said, taking a sip of my wine. The package had been successfully shipped. The recipient was in a state of logistical torment. The system had finally worked. And my work, the beautiful, complex, and deeply satisfying work of a lifetime, was almost complete. All that was left was for the delivery confirmation to arrive. The week following the disappearance of the Porsche was a period of grim and quiet satisfaction. Braden was a man coming undone. The arrogant, swaggering finance bro had been replaced by a haunted, paranoid creature. We would see him in the garage, pacing back and forth in front of the empty, mocking space of my parking spot. His phone perpetually pressed to his ear, his voice a low, angry growl. He was a man with a six-figure problem and not a single lead. The police were useless. The condo board was useless. His insurance company was treating him like a fraud. He was a castaway on an island of his own making, and the tide was coming in. I knew from my years in logistics that the most crucial part of any shipment is not the departure, but the delivery confirmation. It is the final, definitive closing of the loop. My own delivery confirmation was scheduled to arrive exactly 7 days after the pickup. On a bright, sunny Tuesday morning, I was on my balcony, tending to my rooftop tomatoes when I saw the mail carrier enter our building. A few minutes later, I saw him again, knocking on the door of Braden's penthouse. He had a certified letter in his hand, the kind that requires a signature. I watched as a bleary-eyed, disheveled Braden opened the door, scrawled a resentful signature, and took the envelope. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my morning tea. The final, beautiful, and most devastating phase of my operation was now in motion. I didn't have to imagine what was in the letter. My cousin Sal, with a degree of gleeful detail that I deeply appreciated, had read me the contents over the phone the night before. Inside the crisp professional envelope from Keystone Auto Movers was a short, polite, and utterly damning collection of documents. First, a cover letter. Dear Mr. Braden, this letter serves as confirmation that the vehicle transport service as requested by your office has been successfully completed. Your 2023 Porsche 911 VIN XXXX was picked up at 3:05 a.m. on August 4th and was delivered to the designated private storage facility in Harrington, Delaware, at 9:42 a.m. the same day. Next, a pristine notarized copy of the transport authorization form, the one I had so carefully created. It featured the vehicle's details, the pickup and delivery addresses, and, at the bottom, the perfect, high-resolution digital copy of his own arrogant signature. And finally, the piece de resistance, a copy of the delivery receipt, with a new, scrawled, and almost illegible signature next to the words received by S. Martin, facility manager. Underneath the signature was a phone number and a final petty, an exquisitely beautiful line item. A final invoice for outstanding fuel surcharges and after-hours service. Fees will be sent to your primary address shortly. The letter was not an explanation. It was a puzzle, a bureaucratic labyrinth to which he had just been delivered the front gate key. With no map and no exit, his reaction was immediate and glorious. A roar of pure baffled fury echoed from his open balcony doors. A sound so primal it made the pigeons on a neighboring roof take flight. He was on his phone again, but this time his rage had a target. The first call I knew would be to the police. I could almost hear the conversation in my head. It's the weary desk sergeant listening to an incoherent rich man screaming about a car that hadn't been stolen, but had been. Mailed, the conclusion would be swift. A signed authorization form, a legitimate transport company, a delivery receipt. This was no longer a grand theft auto case. This was a civil matter. The Jersey City Police Department with a sigh of collective jeers. Relief would close the case. The next call would be to his insurance company. I could picture the smooth, calm voice of the claims adjuster on the other end. So, to be clear, Mr. Braden, your vehicle was not stolen. It was transported by a licensed carrier that you or a representative from your office hired. I'm very sorry, sir, but your policy covers theft, not logistical errors on your part. Claim denied, and finally he would call the transport company. He would get the friendly, unflappable Patty on the line. I had called her myself on my burner phone the day after the delivery, posing as Brenda, to thank her for the excellent service and to let her know that Mr. Braden was so thrilled with the surprise that he might be a little emotional. If he called, he would scream that he didn't have an assistant named Brenda. He would scream that he had never authorized this. And Patty, a model of customer service, would politely, calmly, and infuriatingly refer him back to the signed authorization form. I'm very sorry you're having internal staffing issues, Mr. Braden, she would say, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy, but our contract was fulfilled to the letter. Our business with you is concluded. Every door was a brick wall. Every path was a dead end. He was trapped in a fortress of perfect, plausible deniability that I had designed just for him. The final, desperate act of this tragic comedy would be his call to the facility manager in Delaware. The call to my cousin Sal. Sal had been rehearsing for this moment for a week. He told me the story later that night, his voice hoarse with laughter. Braden, he said, had called in a state of sputtering, incoherent rage. Who is this? He had screamed into the phone. My car. I am coming to get my car right now. Sal, in his most unhelpful, curmudgeonly old-timer voice, had replied, Yup, got a Porsche. Blue one. Been wondering who that belonged to. It's mine, Braden had shrieked. I am driving down there right now to get it. Don't! Know about that, Sal had said, a slow, deliberate drawl in his voice. This is a private, secure facility. I can't just let any fella who calls on the phone walk in and take a six-figure automobile. I'm gonna need to see some paperwork. What? Paperwork. Well, Sal had said, pretending to think. First off, I'll need a notarized copy of the vehicle's title, proving ownership. I'll need a government-issued photo ID that matches the name on the title, of course. And I'll need a notarized, court-ordered writ of possession, authorizing the release of the vehicle from this facility into your custody. Just to be safe. A court order. Braden had sputtered. That's insane. It's my car. And Sal had continued, ignoring him completely. You'll need to settle the outstanding bill, of course. What bill? Well, there's the initial vehicle receiving and processing fee. And the daily storage fee, which is $150 a day, compounded. And the hazardous materials fee, for the gasoline. and the security surcharge, and the insurance premium. It's all on the invoice I just put in the mail for you this morning. You'll need to pay that in full. Cash or certified check. Only the silence on the other end of the line, Sal said, was a beautiful thing. He had created a bureaucratic monster, a multi-headed hydra of fees and legal requirements that would take Braden months. And thousands of dollars in legal fees. To overcome, the story ends, as it should, on my balcony. It is a week later. The drama has subsided into a new, quiet reality. I am sitting in my favorite lounge chair, a cup of Earl Grey tea in my hand, a book of poetry resting in my lap. The sun is setting over the Hudson, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink. My rooftop garden is thriving. Is beside me reading the newspaper. The world is in perfect, beautiful order. Below us, in the garage, Braden is standing by the elevator. He is on his phone, his voice a low, defeated murmur. He is not shouting anymore. He is pleading. He is talking to a lawyer, and from the snippets of conversation that drift up to me, he is trying to explain the difference between a civil suit for conversion and a criminal complaint for theft. And he is not having much luck. He looks smaller. The arrogant, swaggering finance bro has been ground down by the slow, inexorable gears of the machine I had built for him. He will, I am sure, eventually get his car back. It will cost him a small fortune in legal fees, transport costs, and storage charges. It will cost him weeks of his life and a significant portion of his sanity. It will be a story he will never be able to tell, a humiliation so complete and so bizarre that no one would ever believe him. I take a calm, deliberate sip of my tea. My parking spot, number 1A, is empty. And I know, with a profound and deeply satisfying certainty, that it will remain that way forever. The package had been delivered. The problem had been solved. And the system, my system, had, after all, worked perfectly. A year passed. The story of the vanishing Porsche became a piece of unofficial whispered folklore in the hallowed halls of the Palisades condominiums. It was a ghost story where the ghost was a 68-year-old woman with a genius for logistics and a zero-tolerance policy for entitled pricks. No one knew all the details, of course, but they knew enough. They knew that the arrogant young man in the penthouse had made the fatal mistake of repeatedly parking in the quiet old lady's spot. And they knew that one day his six-figure sports car had simply ceased to be there. And that the arrogant young man himself had followed it into oblivion a few months later. The full story of Braden's downfall came to me in bits and pieces. Mostly from our doorman, Stan, who had become my loyal and deeply amused co-conspirator. Braden, it turned out, had spent nearly 4 months and over $50,000 in legal fees just to get a New Jersey court to issue an order compelling my cousin Sal to grant him access to the barn in Delaware. When he had finally arrived with a flatbed truck, he was presented with a bill from Sal for secure storage, administrative processing, and hazardous materials handling that was so ludicrously inflated. He had apparently just started screaming. He got the car back, but the victory was a hollow, ruinously expensive one. The ordeal had shattered his finances and, more importantly, his ego. He became the laughingstock of his Wall Street firm, the boy genius who had been outsmarted by a retiree. He defaulted on his condo fees, put the penthouse on the market at a loss, and slunk out of our building in the middle of the night, his tail firmly between his legs. The new owners of the penthouse were a lovely, quiet couple, a neurosurgeon and her husband, who drove a sensible Volvo and who would rather die than park in someone else's spot. The peace in my life. And in my parking spot was absolute. But the most interesting consequence of my little operation was not Braden's departure. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the culture of the entire building. My act of asymmetrical warfare had, it turned out, created a new era of profound and abiding respect for the rules, the formerly spineless condo board. So terrified by the specter of Braden's threatened lawsuits and the quiet, steely example I had set had suddenly grown a spine.
A guy.
They hired a new, more aggressive management company. They rewrote the bylaws, adding clauses with real, enforceable fines for parking violations, noise complaints, and improper trash disposal. The vague, polite reminders about community etiquette were replaced by stark, laminated notices of the new fine schedule posted in every elevator. The system, the one I had always believed in, had finally developed teeth. The effect on my neighbors was even more remarkable. People who had once let their dogs run free in the hallways now held their leashes a little tighter. The perpetually loud music from the apartment down the hall was now mysteriously silenced at 10 p.m. sharp. I had not just removed a single problem. I had, through a single masterful act of logistical terrorism, recalibrated the entire building's moral compass. I had become an urban legend, a quiet, grandmotherly boogeyman who haunted the parking garage. The Legend of 1A, and it was a title I wore with a quiet, immense pride. My relationship with Stan, the doorman, had deepened into a warm, knowing friendship. We never spoke of the incident directly, but it was a constant, smiling presence in our interactions. He would see me coming back from a walk and say, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Reed. Spot 1A is safe and secure, as always." And I would just smile and reply, "Thank you, Stan. Excellent work." We were two old soldiers who shared the memory of a great, secret victory, the true test of my new role as the building's unofficial benevolent matriarch came about a year after the Porsche's surprise vacation. A new family had moved into the unit across the hall from us. They were a young couple with a newborn baby, and they were clearly overwhelmed. One afternoon, I ran into the young mother, a sweet girl named Maya, in the hallway. She looked like she was on the verge of tears. "Is everything all right, dear?" I asked, my voice gentle. The question opened the floodgates. "Oh, no." She told me a long, frustrating story about a leak from the unit above them that was causing a patch of black mold to grow in their baby's nursery. The upstairs neighbor was uncooperative, and the new, aggressive management company, in their zeal to enforce the rules, was burying her in a mountain of bureaucratic paperwork, demanding forms and reports she didn't understand. She was a new mother, sleep-deprived and stressed, and she was being defeated by the very system I had helped create. "They just keep sending me forms," she said, her voice trembling. "And the leak is getting worse. I'm so worried about the baby." The old Caroline would have offered her a cup of tea and some polite, useless sympathy. The new Caroline, the Legend of 1A, invited her inside. "Let me see the paperwork," I said. She showed me the email chain, the dense, jargon-filled forms from the management company. I saw the problem in an instant. It was a classic case of bureaucratic siloing. She was dealing with a maintenance department, but the problem also involved inter-unit liability, which was a legal matter for the compliance department. The two departments were not communicating. It was a logistical knot. And there was nothing in the world I loved more than untying a logistical knot. I sat down at my desk. "Okay," I said, my voice taking on the familiar, crisp authority of my old career. "Here is what we are going to do. I spent the next hour drafting a single, perfect email. It was a masterpiece of polite, professional, and legally ironclad communication. I composed it on her behalf, addressed to the heads of both the maintenance and compliance departments at the management company's corporate headquarters in Chicago, whose names and email addresses it took me less than 5 minutes of professional networking site research to find. The email was polite, but it was also a surgical strike. It clearly and concisely laid out the timeline of the leak. It cited the specific articles in the New Jersey Health Code regarding infant exposure to black, MOLD. It referenced the exact clauses in the condo association's master deed regarding the management's responsibility for inter-unit repairs. And it concluded with a single beautiful sentence. As I am sure you understand, my primary concern is the health and safety of my infant child. And I am confident that now that this issue has been brought to the attention of senior management, we can resolve it amicably and avoid the need for any formal proceedings with the Department of Health or the relevant legal authorities. It was a polite, professional, and utterly devastating threat wrapped in the language of concerned motherhood. I showed it to Maya. Her eyes went wide. Should I send this? She whispered, as if we were handling a live explosive. Yes. I said with a reassuring smile. You should. She sent the email from her phone right there in my living room. The reply from the senior vice president of operations for the entire management company came in less than 10 minutes. It was full of profuse, panicked apologies. A team of emergency plumbers and mold remediation specialists was at her apartment. Within the hour, the problem was solved by nightfall. A few days later, Maya and her husband brought me a small, beautiful orchid as a thank you. I don't know how you did that, Mrs. Reed, the young man said, his face full of awe. We've been fighting with them for a month. Sometimes, I said, accepting the flower, you just have to make sure your package gets delivered. To the right address? That evening, I was on my rooftop garden, tending to my tomatoes, the orchid now sitting on the small table next to me. The sun was setting, the lights of Manhattan beginning to glitter across the Hudson. My life was quiet. It was orderly. Bill came and joined me, and we sat together, watching the city light up. I had spent my entire career managing global chaos, a high-stakes game of moving ships and planes and cargo around the world. I had thought that retirement would be the end of that life, a quiet descent into obscurity. But I had been wrong. My greatest, most satisfying logistical challenge had not been a fleet of container ships. It had been a single, obnoxious, electric blue Porsche. And my greatest victory was not the praise of a CEO or a multi-million-dollar contract. It was the quiet, peaceful order of my own small kingdom. It was the grateful smile of a young mother. It was the respectful nod of my doorman. It was the beautiful, glorious, and undisputed emptiness of parking spot number 1A. I had not just retired. I had, in my own small way, taken command. And the world, at least my small corner of it, had never run more smoothly.